we've done AMP, we're going to go through pre-reading, during reading, and post-reading activities. So on that first page there, everybody should have something to write with. Everybody have something to write with?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. So the first, before we even start the first chapter, we're going to look at the title of chapter 1, which is In Which I Met Harris and Am Exposed for the First Time to the Vulgarities of Inflation. Who do you think Harris is? So this is going to be kind of how we used to, when we were practicing predicting. So you're going to make a prediction about who you think Harris is. Take a guess. There's no right or wrong answer. You're making a prediction. The title of the chapter is In Which I Met Harris and Am Exposed for the First Time to the Vulgarities of Inflation. Make sure you put your names on these two. All right. So during reading, you're gonna focus on some things. You're gonna write 2 questions about the characters, setting, or events in chapter 1. You have to be sure to include answers because we're gonna be using this for an activity that we're gonna do later on. 2 questions. That's all I'm asking for. How many questions?
2.
On what? What are we gonna write questions about? Not just the book. Mason?
Character, settings, or event in a chapter.
Right. Are you going to write the answers?
No.
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Make sure you write neatly enough that you can read your own writing. Don't just write anything down. All right. So everybody open up their books to chapter 1. It will be different for each one. It might be page 1. It might be page 5. Depending on how they made the book. All right? And I don't know if I warned you guys yesterday. I don't think I did. The book has language that's appropriate because of the story the narrator's trying to tell. And there's some pretty funny things that happen. All right? So, you ready? Chapter 1. Meeting Harris would never have happened if it were not for the liberal qualities of Schlitz and Four Roses. For nearly all my remembered childhood, there was an open bottle of Schlitz on the table. My parents drank Four Roses professionally from jelly jars, neat without diluting ice, water, or mix. So what do we know about the narrator's parents? Okay. They were consequently vegetables most of the time, although the term vegetable connotates a feeling of calm that did not exist. They went through 3 phases of drunkenness: buzzed, which happy, drunk, mean as snakes, and finally obliterated, a Four Roses coma. Unfortunately, the buzz or happy stage only lasted a short time, and it grew shorter as time progressed until they were pretty much mean whenever they were conscious. Home became, finally, something of an impossibility for me, and I would go to stay with relatives for an extended periods of time. By the time I was 11, I had stayed with several uncles, my grandmother, an old Norwegian bachelor farmer who thought God lived in the haymow of his barn, where he was afraid to go without wearing a feed sack over his head. He told me God couldn't see through feed sacks, and if God couldn't see you, you never died. I had many uncles and shirt-tail relatives, and when I was 11, a kind of rotation dumped on me with Harris and his family. The sheriff sent a deputy to pick me up, and we left for the Larson's place in late afternoon. They lived on a farm 40 miles north of the town I lived in, yet it might as well have been on a different planet. The ride took almost an hour and a half, but it went through such varied terrain that before we had gone 5 miles, I was in despair. For 2 or 3 of those miles, the car moved past farm country that still seemed rather settled. Frequently, there were tractors working in the fields and people who waved cheerfully walking down the sides of the road. But soon the trees closed in, closer and thicker, until there was a wall on either side, and the road and the car were enveloped into a curtain of green darkness. And there were no more open fields or driveways, just dirt tracks that disappeared into the forest, like it was going off the edge of the earth on those old maps used by the explorers, into places where it said there would be monsters here. Okay. Does anybody have a question they think that they can write down from what I just read?
What's there again?
Don't know. You never know. It's a good question though. It has to be, your question has to be something that people can remember from what we read, or they can look up and find in the story. If you can't think of a question, that's okay. I have more to read, but I want to give you opportunity to write it down if you have one in your head. We're ready to move on? Okay, the deputy I was with spit constantly out the side window while extolling the virtues of the car, a 1949 Ford. It's got the V8, he told me. Gets you a lot of power, the V8, spit. You need power for catching criminals while in hot pursuit, spit. You want to be able to move this thing when you're going into a hot pursuit situation, spit. There is absolutely no break in the forest. Black-green density vegetation, the summer northern woods fought right into the shoulder of the asphalt. Indeed, in places, the trees came out over the road and made a green tunnel. I kept looking for any indication of life. People live here, I asked finally. Sure, spit. Must be 200-300 of them scattered around, backed in a ways. The road grew more narrow, closed in until nearly disappeared ahead of the car, and just when it seemed the car would have to dive into the trees, the deputy hung left and the car bounced as we turned onto the dirt road, or more accurately, a set of ruts. We drove back on this track for some miles, probably 7 or 8, and again, just as it seemed the car would run out of road, the deputy turned left once more. The tracks were still more narrow, and I thought we would surely get stuck in the ruts, but suddenly we exploded into a large area of clear land. The Larsons' place, the deputy said. The clear land must have been more than half a square mile. It was planted in corn and small grain and looked rich and even. Along one side of the rectangular field lay a half-mile-long driveway, straight along the edge, and now we turned down it. By this time I was nervous and had trouble sitting still. I met the Larsons only once, though they were some distant way related to me, and that had been 4 years earlier when I was just 7. I'd lived considerably since then, including almost 3 years in the Philippines where my father had been stationed, and I almost had no memory of how they looked, what they were like. There were 4 of them, I knew that. Knew some kind of second uncle, his wife, and my second aunt by marriage, Claire, their daughter Glennis, who was 14, and my second cousin Harris, who was 9. So who's Harris? The narrator's what? Cousin. So did anybody make that prediction it was a relative? Okay, what? Think of you when you get a question in your head about the setting or the characters, then you write it down with what the answer would be. So your question could be, where does Harris live? Where does Harris live? Does he live in the city or on a farm? He lives on a farm, so that could be one of your questions. I don't want everybody to have the same question. That was just an example. That's Dawson's because he asked. You know. All right. Can you listen and write? I thought of what to do as we moved along the drive. I'd done this many times, been put in new places, and I devised a method that worked. I pretended to be shy. Actually, it was only partly pretending, since I had a caution of meeting new people that often translated as a flight. But shyness had served me well, and as we approached the house and the farm buildings, I began to withdraw. They must have been expecting us because as the deputy worked the farm down the driveway, we bounced